Just before I get started, if I could ask, please, for a silent moment of prayer for the 11,000 people who died in Japan as a result of the tsunami. Thank you. I've had the great opportunity to walk through Japan many, many times and know hundreds of people there, and I'm very much distressed. And so thank you for the fundraiser that you're going to have. And Matt's going to be helping me. I want to first say to Paul, thank you, and also to Nick. You know, when Nick first called me and said, would you like to speak before the Rotary, I jumped at the chance. Because throughout my career, mostly in New York City and Brooklyn, I have known many Rotarians. And I am very familiar with the work that you do to help your communities. So it is really an honor for me to speak before you. And I would be remiss if I did not point out one of your distinguished members, Paul Bronzo. See, Paul and I have been working together since 1983. And he's not only been a financial advisor, but he's also been a life coach. Now you might ask, what does it take to have somebody work with you in a business relationship for almost 30 years? Of course, Paul is very competent in what he does, but it is really because of his integrity. And I know that integrity value is shared by all of you Rotarians here. So for all that you do in the community, and for your integrity, and for Paul, can I ask you to give yourselves a round of applause? Thank you, thank you. Now, by prearrangement, I'm only going to take 20 minutes. I'll try to be quick, and maybe we'll have time for questions afterwards. This is the title of my talk today, Polar Bears, Alligators, and a Wonderful Life. That's going to be the title of my forthcoming book. What I really want to focus on is the wonderful life. Now, everyone knows here what a wonderful life is, correct? You know, it's the family, it's the community, it's the job. In my case, I have an exquisite wife. She happens to be here, my wife Doris, hello. We have wonderful children, beautiful grandchildren, and to be quite honest with you, I have had a career that most people would fight to have. And throughout my life, I have been blessed to be surrounded by people who have been able to coach and advise me, people like Paul, and help me in areas where I didn't necessarily have expertise. But there's another part of my wonderful life, and that is called adventure. And that's what I want to focus on today. Now, you all know what I mean by adventure. Adventure is the excitement of going to a new place. It is the intrigue of meeting people of different cultures. It's the suspense of going into the unknown. And of course, all of that is sprinkled with just the right amount of danger to make life interesting. But speaking of danger, let me just pause for one moment and talk about safety. I don't go anywhere in the world without studying where I'm going 6 months in advance. I use guidebooks, maps, the internet, and I actually call ahead to get the lay of the land from people who are actually on the ground. And for every single day that I'm out on the road walking, I have to have a specific plan for what I'm going to eat, where I'm going to sleep, how I'm going to communicate, and most importantly, how I'm going to deal with a number of emergency situations. Now, you've all seen that BMW commercial, this car going up this big road, fancy car, and all of a sudden down at the bottom, the disclaimer, professional driver, closed route, do not attempt at home. The same thing with long distance walking. Safety is always first. Now, by way of introduction, I should tell you that I've had the great honor of walking over 50,000 miles in my career. You see, I keep a detailed log of everywhere that I go. And the great thing about a log is that it's a motivator. When you wake up one morning and see a few empty spaces in that log, it forces you out to train, even if it is 5 o'clock in the morning, and even if it is snowing. And in addition, I have had the great honor of race walking more than 50 miles in more than 50 cities around the world, places like London, Paris, the Loire Valley, Rome. I've walked from Rome to Florence, over in Spain, Madrid, Lisbon, Brussels, the Netherlands, Zagreb in Croatia. But some of the places that I've walked have been a little bit more challenging. Managua in Nicaragua, San Pedro Sula in Honduras, course, Port-au-Prince, and through the Dominican Republic as well, Mumbai in India, and Delhi in India, and a number of places in Africa, Kinshasa, Cairo, Marrakesh. It's been a wonderful life that I've led. Now you might ask, how did all this craziness start? Well, it actually started here in Vietnam, 1969. Just before I went over there, I was a young engineer, a lieutenant of the Corps of Engineers in Rock Island, Illinois, and my job was to handle flood control on the upper Mississippi River. One day the colonel came in and he said, Tom, you've got to stay in shape. Well, at that time the Olympics were on, and one of the walkers, Larry Yun, was from Columbia, Missouri, where I went to graduate school. So I started walking in the cornfields of Iowa. Now, of course, over there in Happy Land, as we used to call it, I didn't do much walking, but I certainly did a lot of running. Then in 1976, I entered my first New York City marathon, and from then I've entered many marathons, ultra races. I've done something like 90 competitive races and a number of journey walks around the world. Now, of all the places I've been, the most interesting thing I've encountered are the animals. I walked around Hawaii and swam with these humpback whales. In the Arctic, I've encountered fox, both brown and white fox. In Honduras, unfortunately, I had to swim with those piranhas. These are eagles that I've encountered in California and up in the Yukon. I think I've come face to face with every type of bear, black, brown, and grizzly. This is a grouse which has attacked me many times in British Columbia. That's a whole story. I've come up face to face with alligators walking through the Florida Trail in Florida, and I've had the great honor of intermingling with hundreds of caribou as they have moved through the tundra of northern Alaska. But you know, of all the animals that I've encountered, you know what the most interesting is? It's you. Yes, exactly right. Exactly. What's your name? Joe. Joe, you're right. It's the human species. That has been the most fascinating part of my walk. Let me see. You all familiar with this person? Clint Eastwood, you know, my favorite actor. Remember the good, the bad, and the ugly? I've encountered all types of people, and I thought it might be fun to tell you about some of the people I met. For example, this is the island of Puerto Rico. Everybody's familiar with Puerto Rico, known for its beautiful beaches, but it's also known for this. This is La Cordillera. This is a mountain range that runs right down the spine, but along this spine there's a series of roads called the La Panoramica, and it's 265 miles, so I decided I was going to walk it, and I invited my brother-in-law, Edgar, to accompany me for the first 2 days. But on the third day, he's a professor, he had to go back to work at school. On the third day, I was right up here in this really heavy wooded area when all of a sudden I was attacked by a pack of dogs. So I reached in the ditch and I was fighting them off with palm fords. And all of a sudden, this gentleman appears. And he was actually controlling the dogs. And he called them off and he came up to me and he was going like this. It turns out he was a deaf mute and all he wanted was some food. So a few days later, I brought him that bag of groceries. Now I want to ask everybody, does everyone here agree that he is ugly? Definitely he is one of the ugly ones. The other side of that coin is he was just a hungry man, so I think Clint might call him a good person as well. Then I've always wanted to go to Burma. You know, I went to Stepanak High School too. That's where I wanted to go. It's also called Myanmar. But as many of you know, Myanmar is a closed country. So I said, well, if they won't let me fly there, maybe I can walk there. And that's exactly what I did. I started here in South China. I crossed the border, walked all the way across Laos, and ended up, after crossing the Mekong River, in Burma. Now, there's another great Clint Eastwood movie. You all know it? Gran Torino. Do you remember, real tearjerker, do you remember Gran Torino, the Hmong people? Well, so I was going up a mountain road in the jungle, and I encountered the real Hmong people. Now, this is a woman who's simply out looking for fruits and roots with her family. Would everybody here agree that she's a good person? Definitely. But when you come down off the mountain in Laos, you have rice fields. Now, I should report to you that there's a difference between the rice fields in China and the rice fields in Laos. You see, in China, all of the farmers have mechanized plows, but in Laos they have to use these hoes or oxen. So I'm going by this farmer, and all of a sudden I notice that he starts to run out on the road towards me. And a little while after that, he caught up to me. He had a big hoe. Now, I knew from my study there were bandits in this area, so I was a little concerned. So when he got up to me, I had a water bottle, and not knowing what to do, I handed out the water bottle to him, and I said to him in Vietnamese, "Nua," which means water. Okay, I knew that I was in Laos, but I was so panicked, I couldn't remember the Laotian word for water. And he turns to me and says to me in English, "You want opium?" This was a drug dealer in the middle of Laos. Now I'm going to ask you, does anyone here not think that he's bad? He was definitely bad. The only thing, I just hope that he's not related to the poor people up on the mountain. Then the Sahara Desert, you know, I remember the story of that first British one who snuck into Timbuktu in 1826. He was from Scotland, and he wanted to be the first Westerner, so he dressed up in this Arab gown, and he snuck into Timbuktu. I mean, that story made me feel so good. Of course, he was assassinated on the way out, but still I was enthralled about the Sahara Desert. So I wanted to walk across the Sahara, and I had the opportunity a few years ago when some Frenchmen put together a big race. And this is how it was. The temperature here was about 110 degrees, and it was very difficult because you had to, for 6 days, carry all your things with you. However, on the 4th day, we encountered this. This is how most people may know the Sahara Desert. Sand dunes. And the distance that you had to cover on day 4 was 50 miles. Now, this is very difficult terrain. Now, frankly, I knew that I couldn't do it in daylight. And if you didn't do it in 24 hours, you were automatically disqualified. They sent you home. So I ended up camping all night in the desert. When I got back, my tent mates were waiting for me. These were French Canadians. And I should tell you, before and every night when I went out, I had to take 2 rocks together. You see the little rocks on the ground there, pound them together to make a spark so that I could make a fire. You had to carry and make your own food every night. When I came back, my tent mate said, "Tom, we have a gift for you." And they had gone to the desert and they gathered a big pile of firewood so that I could make a big fire and have a good meal. So I ask you, are these good people? Definitely they are. Then finally I retired from Pfizer in 2005, and I wanted to undertake a lifetime quest to go from Point Barrow, Alaska, the northernmost point in the United States, to Key West, Florida. No one has ever walked this before. Obviously, I knew that I'd have to do it alone. Unless, Stacy, would you be? No, they wouldn't let her go with me. So I knew I'd have to do it alone. But the reason I undertook this walk was to help bring attention to malaria. My friends, 1.5 million people die from this disease every year, and this disease is thousands of years old. It killed Alexander the Great. It is the reason why the Roman Empire was conquered, was because of malaria. And I wanted to call attention that we can wipe out malaria. There's no new malaria in the United States. There is no new malaria in Europe. You know why? Because of DDT. We exterminated the Anopheles mosquito. And yet in sub-Saharan Africa, there's 1.5 million people who are dying every year. So I laid out this route. Point Barrow, Alaska is way up there on the top, and of course everybody knows where Key West is. And I said to my lovely wife, "Doris, I'd like to go on a long walk." And she said, "Fine, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to go from Point Barrow, Alaska to Key West, Florida." She said, "Fine, how far is it?" I said, "It's 6,500 miles. Now, she's been with me my whole life. She knows I'm a little on the strange side when it comes to walking. Then finally she said, "Fine, how long is it going to take you?" And I said, "I think I can do it in a year." And she said, "You're not going away for a year." And Doris was absolutely right. You know, I was willing to go off and just go walking. So instead of doing that, I laid it out in 14 stages. And on my website, which you'll see later, you can see all of this in the up-to-date. But this is the actual route that I'm taking, and so I very carefully planned where I'm going. Now, this is stage 1, out of Point Barrow, Alaska. When I got to Point Barrow, I understood why no one has never walked out of there before. And that's because the only way to get there is by boat or by train. boat or by plane. There are no roads leading into Point Barrow. So if you want to get out, you have to do what I did. You have to cross the Arctic Ocean in the middle of the winter. And here's what it looks like. You know, it was 125 degrees out in the desert. It was literally minus 60 degrees up there in Point Barrow, Alaska. But I am going to tell you something. I was afraid. I was afraid up there because I was 400 miles from the North Pole, about as much in the middle of nowhere as anyone could be, and I was afraid of getting lost. So I got a guide. This is my guide. His name is Kurt Lehman. He said, just call me an Alaskan Indian. And he had this big pickup truck, and he would drive along and serve me tea. And every night we'd go back to Point Barrow so that we could sleep. And finally I said, Kurt, why are we going back to Point Barrow? Why don't we just set a camp out on the ice? And he said, Tom, there's a lot of hungry polar bears out here, and I wouldn't want you to be eaten. So he was actually right. So I'm going to say Kurt is definitely one of the good guys. Now this is stage 2. Stage 2, you're all familiar with the Ice Road Truckers, the show, started from Dead Horse, Alaska, due south 500 miles, due south 500 miles to Fairbanks. And it went along the Alaska pipeline, if any of you haven't seen it. See, the pipeline is above the ground. That's so it doesn't affect the migration of animals like the caribou, and also so that the permafrost doesn't damage the pipeline. And by the way, with all the trouble in Libya, I'm glad that we're getting 1.8 million gallons of oil out of this pipeline every day. Now, but shortly after taking this picture, I'm walking along, and I'm sure it's happened to you, and I just felt something was behind me. Did that ever happen? You're out and you just know you have the sixth sense. And I look around and here is a big wolf. Now I knew there were aggressive wolves in this part of northern Alaska. But from all my study, and yes, and not Nick Wood, an aggressive wolf, not Nick Wolf. So what I knew from all of my study is you don't run. So I started backing up slowly and the wolf started to come towards me fast. Thank God. An ice road trucker came by in a big 18-wheeler loaded with pipe right at that moment. But he passed me. Then all of a sudden I hear, "Arr!" He screeched on his brake, and this ice road trucker actually backed up 100 yards. He rolled down his window, southern drawl, he said, "Is that your dog?" And I said, "Hell no, that's a wolf." And he said, "Come on." And he took me on his running board and took me out of harm's way. So I'm going to say that ice road trucker, when you see that show on television, they have the Alaska, the Dalton Road, please, please remember that these are great people. Then finally, last summer, I passed the Bear Glacier. I don't know whether you've ever been there. I had made my way all the way across Alaska, all the way across the Yukon, and most of the way through British Columbia. A beautiful sight. So here I am, I'm coming up a very narrow mountain road. Can you imagine this beautiful glacier with blue in the middle, slowly coming down, and then on the other side is a big cliff. It's raining, it's foggy, it's cold, even though it's July, and it was just one of those sights that you never forget. The only problem is, with all that fog, I couldn't see the grizzly bears that were around. Fortunately, I was able to get through. Then a few days later, you can see the date, July 10th, 2000, I finally reached 2,000 miles. Now, before you think that's a big accomplishment, I should tell you it took me 5 years to get there. But I have gotten 2,000 miles along my journey. Then we were talking earlier about trail running, and this is what I did in October. In order to cross from Canada into Washington State, I found a shortcut. It was only a 150-mile shortcut. But look, when you're walking 6,000 miles, every mile counts. But I had to go through the woods, which I don't normally do. This was through the Northern Cascades National Park. Some of you have been there. You know, when I was there in October, all through the woods, I didn't see any people. And I didn't see any wildlife either. And I was glad I didn't see the wildlife because this is an area that's well known for its mountain lions. I'm sure they saw me, but I didn't see them. And finally, I got onto a road. This is in Washington State. It's between Spokane and Seattle, coming up Route 20. And I climbed this mountain 5,500 feet. You know, that's what I do. It's a little bit every day. You just keep going up. But when I got to the top of the mountain, I encountered this young man. His name was Jesse. He had come 900 miles on his bicycle from Montana. And he was heading to Washington to have a new life. And I was saying to myself, that's the American dream. This is a country where you can get on your bike with just your backpack. You can take your bike 900 miles and have a new life. So I'm saying Jesse is definitely one of the good people that I've met along my route. So here's where I'm at so far. I've gone 6.5 stages. I've walked 131 days. The main thing is I've gone 2,600 miles. But I still have 3,800 miles to go, and I have a specific plan. Lord willing, I hope to get there by December 31st, 2013. Now, but this is really what it's all about. These are women in sub-Saharan Africa. These are the people that are affected by malaria. Younger women of childbearing age and young children under the age of 5 account for most of those 1.5 million that are killed. And this is the baddest woman on the planet. She is the worst woman. She's been around for 1,000 years. We need to do something about it. This is the female Anopheles mosquito. But there is hope, my friends, and we don't have to use DDT. At Johns Hopkins University and at the London School of Tropical Medicine, they are manipulating genes within this lady. And they actually, in London, are working on gene manipulation that can prevent the plasmodium. That is what causes the malaria from forming in this young lady. So I'm an optimist. I think with help, we can change her into this. and make the Anopheles mosquito not harmless and wipe out malaria. And by the way, if we can wipe out malaria this way, we can wipe out yellow fever, dengue fever, all of these diseases that kill millions of people. That's why this cause is so very important. And finally, remember, we can wipe out malaria. And I know Rotarians know this expression. The only people who can change the world are the ones that want to. And that's why you're here. And that's why you're happy. And that's what you're doing. Thank you.